Legalizing cannabis was supposed to curb the illegal drug trade. So why have authorities in California seized a record $1 billion in black market marijuana over the past year? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is America's drug trade. For decades, the U.S. war on drugs helped Mexican, Colombian, and Chinese cartels flourish while putting more than 500,000 Americans in prison every year for nonviolent possession. By most accounts, that program was a failure. So enter the push for legalization. And in 1996, California became the first state to legalize marijuana for medical purposes. Later, it would open up sales for recreational use. And today, most of the country has legalized the drug to varying degrees. But the cartels continue to thrive. And in California alone, some experts estimate that even at legal dispensaries, 70 to 80% of what's sold is illegally cultivated. We'll debate why that's happening in just a moment. But first, this reports on the black market for marijuana.
Legalizing recreational marijuana was supposed to make Californians $1 billion in tax revenue by 2018, but projections were way off, only earning the state roughly $350 million instead. At the top of the list of reasons for slow sales on such an in-demand product is the U.S. federal government, which considers weed a Schedule I illegal drug, the same class as heroin. And in California, that's bad for business.
We're facing, especially in California and LA specifically, an illicit market that is extremely strong. We're outnumbered 3-to-1 illicit operator to legal operator. So, we have outrageous price compression that we have to see at our stores.
And even for many legal dispensaries, turning to the black market is the only way to financially break even. Since the federal government still outlaws marijuana, dispensaries face higher licensing fees, real estate costs, attorney fees, and inspection costs, which can run a single business hundreds of thousands of dollars. Illicitly grown weed offers a cheaper product to keep overhead lower. But that's not all. Many dispensaries face daily limits on how much product they can sell, which drives down supply and drives up costs. Meanwhile, illegal drug dealers skirt all of these obstacles and reap the benefits.
It's a money lucrative business, so there's people willing to take the risk and open up the illegal dispensaries.
The U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency says last year it arrested 6,000 people connected to cannabis, a number that's significantly higher than the year before. But if the war on drugs is any indication of how well this tactic will work, plans to quash the black market may very well go up in smoke.
So why hasn't the illicit cannabis trade disappeared since legalization? And is there a better approach toward curbing cartels? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Denver, Colorado, Mason Tvert. He's a partner at VS Strategies and a pro-marijuana lobbyist. In Washington is Jordan Davidson. He is a lobbyist at Smart Approaches to Marijuana, which opposes its legalization and commercialization. And in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Mike Vigil. He is a former chief of international operations for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. Thanks all so much for being with us. Mason, I'll start with you. You have had, several years now to reflect on cannabis legalization in several states. You believed before that cartels and the underground market were actually reaping the benefits of what should be a legal trade. You wanted to see that money go to legitimate tax-paying businesses and citizens. But the black market trade and the cartels still persist today. So what's gone wrong?
Well, the biggest problem is that there are still a number of jurisdictions throughout the country, a number of states that maintain prohibition, and in doing so, they are really bolstering these the illegal trade of cannabis. I mean, right now, billions of dollars in cannabis sales are now taking place in regulated, licensed stores in states like Colorado and Massachusetts and around the country. But because there's other states where it's illegal, it's resulting in the persistence of this illegal market where that demand in those other states needs to be met, and there's illegal actors there to meet it.
What about
But
the
we
state
have
of...
seen a dramatic drop sorry.
No, I was going to say, but just citing the state of California, where it has been more or less fully legalized, and the cartels are still actually profiting in the state itself. Why?
Well, for one thing, cartel activity around marijuana has dramatically declined in this country. We've seen a huge drop in the amount of marijuana coming across the border from Mexico and the United States. We've also seen a huge drop in the number of marijuana trafficking offenders in this country, according to the federal government. But what's happening in California in particular is two things. Number one, regulations are not being enforced enough. So you still have illegal operators. These are not cartel members. These are people who own stores that are operating openly, that are selling cannabis illegally and not being stopped. You also have significantly high taxes that are making it very difficult for those businesses that are following the rules, that are paying taxes, to compete with those businesses that are not following the rules and not paying taxes.
Right. I mean, first of all, does there need to be greater punishment for those, large-scale, especially illegal producers and dealers?
It's not so much a matter of greater punishment, but enforcement of the rules. A number of folks in California and other states have chosen to follow the rules that are in place, to have the security rules, to be checking for ID, to be really enforcing all of these laws within their businesses. But there are also still these folks who are out there operating outside of the law that are just not, the laws aren't being enforced. So it's not a matter of the laws not working, it's a matter of the laws not being enforced. And of course, again, in a lot of these states, like Colorado, for example, we're seeing billions of dollars in cannabis sales taking place in licensed stores that otherwise would have taken place in the illegal market.
So if the United States, if every state in the U.S. just kind of followed the Colorado model, do you think it would work ideally?
Yeah, I think that's why we don't see a huge illegal alcohol trade in the United States, because every state has made alcohol legal and there's no longer a demand for illegal alcohol. But immediately following the end of Prohibition, there were some states that continued to ban alcohol, and those states had illegal alcohol sales because they were continuing to enforce this prohibition and demand was being met by an illegal market.
Okay. Jordan, let me cross to you. Tell us why you think legalization really just has failed as an institution.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show, first and foremost. But, I'd like to let kind of your viewers know, firstly, that the marijuana that is being sold today is not the marijuana of the past, not your parents' and grandparents' marijuana, the Woodstock weed of the 1970s. It's a supercharged version of marijuana, not 2 to 5% THC, the ingredient that gets you high, the component that gets you high, but 99% THC today. And so the reason really that we still see a black market existing in legal states is because legalization is increasing the demand for people to actually use marijuana. That's why we're seeing young people and adults alike using marijuana at higher rates in legal states. And 10 years ago, when Colorado did legalize marijuana for recreational purposes, they sold their voters on the false promise that the legal industry would replace the black market. And that has absolutely been a promise that has been unkept in Colorado and legal states like California, where 75% of the marijuana sold is sold on the black market. 70 to 80% now, they're estimating, leaders in California. The marijuana sold in legal dispensaries are from actually black market, from the underground market. And I'll also say, I'd like to respond, if I may, to a point that Mason made. I think he said something like, there aren't as many arrests or seizures of marijuana coming across our borders. Well, that's actually exactly the point. There aren't. It's because the foreign kind of drug cartels have moved to the United States. That's the reason that in 2020, there were 4.5 million seizures by the DEA of marijuana compared to less than 3 million in 2018. It's because they're moving to Colorado suburbs, California suburbs, Washington suburbs, where they say, hey, it's legal. Why not grow it here, rent homes, and grow it in the backyards?
Okay. Let me ask Mike, why the DEA then, has made so many thousands of arrests in spite of various states legalizing cannabis.
Well, the thing is that marijuana is the most abused drug in the United States. And marijuana still in the federal government is still illegal. However, the federal government has allowed states to basically legalize marijuana. And I agree that marijuana is a huge problem here in the United States. And the legalization of recreational marijuana that started in 2012, and you had pro-legalization politicians that said that this would basically diminish, the cartels, organized crime, and it hasn't. It actually, in many instances, has fueled, organized crime here in the United States. And I disagree that the legalization throughout the entire United States would basically, create a situation and do away with illegal drugs. That's not the case. When you take a look at these legal dispensaries that have high startup costs, taxation, what have you, you're always going to have criminals that are going to undercut the legal marijuana market. And regardless of what happens, it's going to take place.
Okay.
Now, I do agree that the Mexican cartels are going, moving away from plant-based drugs such as opium poppies and then also marijuana, and they're going into synthetic drugs, methamphetamine, and then also fentanyl. So those are even deadlier drugs.
Right. That's an entirely separate discussion as well. There's a whole universe of problems associated with that. But let me come back to Mason, because what we were hearing from Jordan is that the problem with marijuana now, even the legalized version, is that it's this supercharged drug, and that it is more dangerous than the cannabis of the past. And also, if you could address, twofold question here, there's this contradiction that there is actually still a federal ban on marijuana, that it is a Class 1 substance comparable to heroin, while individual states are still able to legalize it in mass numbers.
Well, the fact of the matter is that cannabis is objectively far less harmful than alcohol. And the only real difference between today's marijuana and the so-called your grandparents' or parents' marijuana is that today's marijuana is actually controlled. It's being regulated. It's being grown in controlled facilities. It's being tested. It's being sold in legitimate stores that are asking for ID. And, it's really kind of, when you think about it, the other gentleman on the call is essentially lobbying for the cartels and for illegal actors by saying he wants to keep cannabis illegal and in the hands of these dangerous cartels. Right now, about 2/3 of Americans or more think that marijuana should be legal for adults, that it should be regulated. The vast majority of this country recognizes that marijuana is less harmful than alcohol, less addictive, it's less toxic, it's less likely to contribute to violence. Ultimately, there's going to be millions of Americans that want to use cannabis. There have been for decades, if not centuries. They're going to get it somewhere. Do we want them to get it from licensed businesses that are controlled and taxed and having to follow rules? Or do we want to go with the system being promoted by my colleague here, who is suggesting it would be better to be sold by cartels and illegal actors who are not asking for ID and are not testing their products and might be selling other illegal drugs? If you go into a legal marijuana dispensary, you can't find other illegal drugs there. When you go to the illegal market, you can find anything.
Right, Jordan, I need you to respond to that. I mean,
yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. So, first of all, absolutely am not lobbying, on behalf of anyone but the side of public health. As a young person in long-term addiction recovery who struggled with a cannabis use disorder, almost 4 years of sobriety, and this December I'll be celebrating that. I'm here on behalf of public health. And that's why I actually support, and our organization, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, stands in firm alignment with every single major medical association in the United States, opposing legalization, but we also support the decriminalization of low-level possession. So because we don't want someone, a young kid, a 15-year-old who's caught with a joint, we don't want him to have an arrest record or to, get a criminal record that could impact his life. We would rather see someone who's struggling, be diverted to treatment. And what I'll also say, this kind of argument about marijuana being safer than alcohol. Well, firstly, in one major difference, which Mason overlooked, is that the increase in THC potency that we've seen, the dramatic increase, is worse in terms of addiction. We have an addiction rate of 1 in 3 people using marijuana getting addicted to it today, compared to about 1 in 10, 20, 25 years ago. And also in terms of mental health and mental illness, marijuana can have significantly negative impacts, especially regarding illnesses like psychosis and schizophrenia. And again, on this point of alcohol, that's like saying our taillight's broken, so why not put out our headlights too? We have a commercial alcohol industry, so let's make another commercialized addiction for profit industry with marijuana.
Let me ask, Mason, can you decriminalize without legalization? Is there a public health question here that applies as well?
Well, yes, you can, in the fact that, like, for example, Colorado and many of the other states that have legalized allow for the home cultivation of marijuana by those individuals that choose to grow their own. But just like with alcohol, you can brew your own beer, but the vast majority of beer consumers would prefer to buy it from a store where it's produced by people who know what they're doing. They get more variety, better quality. It's more convenient. Not everyone has the capability or the quite literally the space to do it. So you have both of these sides, but ultimately we want these products to be safe. We want them to be as safe as possible. Again, we're called pro marijuana, but we are pro public safety in that we want these products to actually be controlled, whereas the other gentleman wants them to remain uncontrolled. He wants no one to be asked for ID. He wants the products to not be tested. He wants it, we wouldn't even know how much THC is in marijuana. If you're concerned about potency, wouldn't you want to know how potent each product is so you can make your decisions based on that? It'd be like walking into a liquor store and seeing a bunch of bottles with no labels and just clear liquid in them, and you would have no idea if it's vodka, if it's beer. That would be unsafe. What we're saying is, let's control it. Let's make sure people know what they're getting, and we will see a safer society.
Jordan, quickly, if you want to respond.
Yes. So this industry has proven time and time again that it cannot be regulated. Mason, in the beginning of the show, you actually said that one of the problems is that they're not enforcing regulations. We've had 10 years to experiment with this legalization and commercialization starting in Colorado, and they haven't gotten it right. And so what I'll say is the reason that you can't even trust what they're putting in these products and the regulation and the labeling is because it's financially backed by companies that have been deceiving the public and deceiving public health for decades. Big tobacco, big alcohol, big pharma. When Canada legalized marijuana, big tobacco, Altria, the parent company of Marlboro, invested $2 billion in the industry. Constellation Brands, the parent company of Corona Beer and Svedka Vodka, invested $4 billion. And the former CEO of Purdue Pharma, the company that invented OxyContin, now owns a marijuana company. So these are the people and the big players in the industry. And that's why we've seen that you actually can't really regulate it, that you can't effectively label it, that we're seeing that they're increasing the levels of mold that they're allowing on marijuana. And people are getting products that really are not safe, even in these supposedly regulated dispensaries.
Okay. Mason, I need to ask you this, because I've actually heard it described, particularly in the case of California, as a classist market, actually both for buyers and sellers. So those who kind of grew and sold it pre-legalization can't actually afford to enter the legal market now. They've got these licensing fees that are too high, they've got commercial spaces that they need, and then there are too many taxes that actually price them out of that market. And then also for buyers, legal cannabis is cost prohibitive for many of them. So how do you go ahead?
Well, yeah, first I would say that cannabis is not more expensive in the legal market. In fact, in Colorado, cannabis is less expensive now than it's probably ever been in its history. It's being sold in these licensed businesses. There's a wholesale market. And in fact, one of the bigger problems in Colorado is that there's too much cannabis being produced and not enough of it being consumed, which is resulting in a huge surplus and a lot of these companies struggling as a result. That's not to say we want more people using cannabis, but the point is that right now it's an economic game, and cannabis is affordable to consumers. They also have more of a variety. They also have safer products, and they know what's in them. When it comes to the other side of it, the sellers, you're absolutely right that there are a lot of these issues that make it difficult for people to enter the market. States are now working on addressing that. New state laws have social equity programs. They're working on trying to make licensing processes cheaper and easier, but it's really difficult when you still have a prohibitionist mindset that says, let's limit the number of businesses to 3 in a state or 4 in a state. Well, now you're going to have huge competition for those licenses, and it's going to result in only those with the most capital or the most experience being the ones that get those licenses. And that's a very tricky situation. And that's why states are now have been working to come up with different licensing schemes to address these sorts of things.
Okay. Mike, let me come back to you because, there's an issue here that Jordan raised as well that, we have to try to make it a public health issue and basically a less attractive product. But now you have these competing markets, illegal and legal. Mason says that at least in Colorado, the price differential is minimal. But some are saying, you can compare this to the trade in even black market luxury goods, and that someone who buys the $40 Gucci handbag on the street never really had the option to pay $2,000 for the real thing anyway. So the black market reaches an entirely different type of consumer that quite simply couldn't afford what's legally on the market anyway. Is there some truth to that?
Here's the problem, is that most people are going to go with the lowest price product. And in this case, it's going to be the illegal marijuana. Now, the issue of marijuana being regulated is absolute nonsense. It's never been regulated. Even in Colorado, a lot of the marijuana produced in Colorado is filtering into nearby states. These states have filed suit against Colorado. You have gluts in Oregon of marijuana production, also in California. And a lot of that marijuana finds itself into other states, causing big issues. Now, this thing of marijuana being an innocuous drug, that's also nonsense, because marijuana cigarette has 4 times the carcinogens of a regular cigarette. It's a hallucinogenic drug. As Mason was saying, in my day, when I first came on with DEA, the tetrahydrocannabinol level or THC levels were maybe 1%. Now, marijuana has been genetically engineered to, be maybe have a 30% THC level. So, and apart from that, even more people are going to jail as a result of the legalization of marijuana. So this nonsense about being regulated is stupid.
I mean, Mason, it's interesting because you had said before, you can die of alcohol poisoning, you can die of an opioid overdose, but you've said there really is no case for dying of a marijuana overdose. So here you are again trying to build a case against people who are arguing that it is a dangerous drug.
Well, let's be clear here that marijuana is not entirely safe, just like no product is entirely safe. I mean, ultimately, marijuana is less harmful than those substances, and it should be reflected in the laws and regulations around it. But it's critical that people know what marijuana is, that they know what the effects are, that they know what's in it and what they're getting, that they know how potent it is. Like, these are very critical factors. I will just say to the gentleman who just spoke, there's never been a single case of lung cancer in the history of the world attributed to a marijuana-only smoker. So this notion that it somehow has more carcinogens than tobacco is utterly ridiculous. What it comes down to is this. There's millions and millions and millions of people throughout the United States who want to use marijuana. They've been doing it regardless of whether it's legal or not for decades.
Do we want them to be able to access it legally and safely from licensed businesses, like in Colorado, where now the state government believes the vast majority, upwards of 80% of people, are now accessing marijuana legally. The other 20% in Colorado are accessing it by growing it themselves or through a medical caregiver. Or do we want them to buy it in the illegal market? And it's those other states. It's those states that are suing Colorado, those ones that want to keep cannabis illegal, that are driving the illegal market and keeping these illegal actors in business. Because right now, Coloradans do not buy marijuana from the illegal market. It's much easier, it's not more expensive, and you have more variety and better quality when you buy marijuana from a licensed business. Okay. Whereas these other states, have to access it from criminals.
So Colorado is your model. Mason, that will have to be the final word. Unfortunately, we are completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @_Newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.